Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your understanding with rescheduling this last week. I apologize for that, but I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about this. So today we're going to talk about hiring practices that attract quality candidates, and I think this is something that's really important for all of our programs because we see how, in the long run, the investment that we put into our hiring processes and getting the right candidate and the right person in those job positions in the long run makes our lives a lot easier and really improves the quality of our services long term. So we want to help you with that. So feel free as we move through, if you have questions, feel free to pop those into the chat box or save them till the end. Either way is great. There we go. Okay, I think I have the chat set up correctly now. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Oh, also, I guess I should introduce myself, by the way. My name is Liz Stewie, and I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Manager here at Violence-Free Colorado. Here are our goals for the day. So we're going to talk about some common challenges when attracting job applicants. We're going to talk a lot about how to write and promote job postings. We're going to talk about what qualifications are truly needed for advocacy. We're going to talk about tools for improving the applicant review and interview process. We're going to talk about wages and really understanding if our wages are competitive and appropriate for our communities. And then we're going to just touch briefly diverse hiring practices is such an important topic and something I think we can delve into a lot deeper. But I'm just going to skim the surface of it to give you a starting point where you can start thinking about this issue. So attracting job applicants. So this is kind of a nuts and bolts thing, but I think it can really help. So where do you put your job postings? We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about how to do that, but there are a couple of places where folks who already have some experience in advocacy might be looking for job postings. Or people who are looking to get into the field. So a couple of ideas. So first I'm going to plug violencefreecolorado.org has a free resource where you can post jobs, contract, you can put out a call for contract applications, or even non-paid internships. So that is a free process. If you go to our website, click the Get Involved tab, click the Jobs board, and then there's a link at the top of the page where you can submit an application. And so you don't have to be a member of Violence-Free Colorado to post or to use that, and we promote that occasionally. And so that's a free place. Part of the reason we built that is we know that a lot of website listings require that you pay, and sometimes that's a barrier for programs. So we want to use that. So as far as paid job posting resources in the state of Colorado, probably the biggest and most frequently used is the Colo Nonprofit Association Board. It's a paid site. Even if you're a member, you still have to pay a little bit additional to post a job. But all that being said is it's also a really great place to get applicants. And so that might be something you want to think about when you're thinking about your budgets for different positions. You might want to think about building in a budget to pay for that. This is especially true when you're thinking about leadership or management positions, or if you're really trying to grow outside of your community, or if you're trying to seek talent from outside of your traditional pool, that online posting might be really helpful. And then there are all of the different other ones. So a couple of ways to get creative. If you have a local newspaper, especially if they have an online section, that could be a really helpful place. Check and see in some communities, places like United Way will have job posting resources on their website or in their buildings. If you have universities in your community, that might be some place, or other community spots. And we tend to go mostly online, which is true. That is where a lot of it is happening. But a lot of people are prompted to look at your website to see job postings, or to look at another website to see job postings by something they see in the community. And so, you know, if you have a place that you know a lot of members of your community go to, coffee shops, public libraries, those different kinds of places, it might be helpful to put up a flyer also as well to really get that word out about it. Also, letting folks know internally that this position is open. So sending an email to your staff saying, here's the link to this job posting, please forward this to your network, can be really helpful because your staff is working in your community, and so they may have an idea of some folks who might be appropriate. And then just something as simple as putting a link to the job description in your email signature. Again, you never know who might be looking for a job or who might know somebody who is looking for a job. And so if that's in every email you're sending out, especially when you're emailing with community contacts and things like that, that could really help getting that into the hands of the people that you want to see it. So now job descriptions. So these are work intensive, but I find them in a lot of the resources out there, a lot of the research and a lot of the HR stuff says that it's really worth the time that you put into your job description. So your job description is your first and your best chance to communicate what you are really looking for. A lot of things in advocacy can be taught, right? We support our staff, we counsel them, we teach them. A lot of things can be figured out along the way, but if you're not communicating your core values through your job description, you're going to wind up with people who aren't a good fit for your work. And of course, this includes your mission statement, but it also includes other things like the way you do your work, right? So, you know, if empowerment, for example, is a core value of your agency, you're going to want to, in your job description, say that, right? Directly list your core values so that the applicant has a really clear idea of what those are, but then even potentially ask them to describe or to elaborate on how those of your core values align with their core values. And that can be a really helpful way. You know, looking at cover letters is really hard, right? Sometimes they get really repetitive. People tend to sometimes use words that are coded or vague or kind of like this like HR lingo speak that aren't really getting at the core of what you want. So really don't hesitate to put in your job description how you want people to apply. So do you want them to email a certain person? Do you want them to fill out an online application? Whatever it is that your process is, put that in writing. You know, here's where you go to apply. And in your application, please include whatever it is you want it to be included. So resume, cover letter, references are kind of the standard things, but you can also ask them to be specific. So please include a cover letter that addresses a crisis situation and how you handled it, for example, or whatever it is that you're really wanting to dig into. And this can be really helpful if you have a position open that is really targeting a certain group that you are wanting to support. So for example, if you're hiring for a youth and children advocate in your emergency shelter, you know, maybe you want a question about a time that they were working with a young person who was struggling with trauma, or however you want to word it for that specific position. It can be really helpful. And I think that indicates to the person who is applying what your values are. And that's going to weed out some people who may not be a good fit. You know, maybe somebody really wants to work in a domestic violence or sexual assault agency, but they don't really have a background with children and don't love working with children. They just want to work for this agency, but they see your post, and in your post, they're asked to describe in their cover letter their experience with children. Well, that's going to give them a pause, at least a chance to think about whether or not this is really appropriate. So hopefully that will mean that you get the best applications you possibly can. Also, it will give you, if people don't have that experience that's really crucial to this position, you'll know right off the bat, right? And that can help you sort through and prioritize some of those applications when you're moving on to the more intensive parts of the job application process. And so a lot of these best practices around hiring really require that you both have a solid grasp of what your core values are as an agency, but also a solid grasp of what a job really entails. And I think this is extra hard for folks in the advocacy field, right? Because advocates wear a lot of different hats, right? And depending on the needs of the survivor, those skills are going to change. So this is where it can be really helpful. You know, if the person who's currently in the position is moving on and you have time to work with them about finding out what that is, or before any of your positions even come open, spending time with the people who are doing the work now and getting really clear on what it is they do on a day-to-day basis, right? So, you know, things like connecting people with resources, talking to somebody when they're struggling with feeling strong emotions, you know, those things that you don't see in a lot of typical job descriptions but are really crucial to our work as advocates can be great to include. So even before you write the job description, spend some time getting really clear on what your values are and getting really clear on what the job entails and what you need from that person. And it can be easy to be aspirational in a job description, and it's not bad to be aspirational in a job description. You know, maybe we want somebody who's coming in as a child and youth advocate who can build a curriculum for children's activities for a support group. You know, that is a wonderful, wonderful job. But if you're going to be asking that person to work on that in small pieces when they have free time around their direct service duties, you want to be more, you want to be really clear about that. If that is not something you're able to, you know, dedicate, you know, 10 or 15 hours a week to in somebody's job description, maybe put that in, be explicit about that, right? So when not doing direct service, this person will work on developing a curriculum for this program, or whatever it is to kind of tailor it for your own needs. So it's great to think about what you would want this person to do in an ideal world, but you also want to be realistic about what this person is really doing, because again, that will help you get the best fit for what you're looking for. So here are some things. Especially in places with tight job markets. So if you're, you know, in a place like Denver or Colorado Springs where there's really low unemployment, and you're, you know, you're competing against other folks for these job applications, these are some of the things that applicants have reported that they will kind of, you know, just decide they're not going to apply for that job when they see some of these things. So vague job description. So this one can be a big turnoff. If a person can't read on the paper and have at least a foundational understanding of what the job entails, they're not as likely to apply for it. So this one is kind of, I think people have different opinions on this, and my opinion is that I think it's really important to list your salary range up front, because, you know, you could go deep into the hiring process with somebody, and if your salary range isn't feasible for them, if it is, you know, they have a family and they really can't go below a certain amount, if they don't know that up front, that could be, you know, a big time waste for you, and it's not fair for them. And so I know this is hard for a lot of folks, especially for entry-level advocacy positions that, you know, maybe don't pay so much. And so sometimes I think we're afraid to put that amount in our job listing because we're worried that's going to turn people off. But we're going to have to tell them that information anyways, right, before they accept the job offer. There's no way we can get out of sharing that information, so we want to be upfront. Also, I think it's totally okay to list a job range. If you have a range of possibility within your budget that you can pay this, you can put that range in. And you can also indicate that it's likely that somebody will start at the start of the range, or that the range is dependent on experience. All of those things are totally fine, but I think that you will get higher quality candidates if you're upfront about what you're offering from the beginning. So schedule, right? So this is really important, right? It impacts people's daily lives, and they need to know. I mean, I encourage folks, if at all possible, to put the exact hours that somebody's going to be working, or if the hours are flexible, or if they change over time, be explicit about that. Also, you want to be really explicit about whether or not the job involves on-call. I worked at an agency once that didn't tell me at any point in the job process that the job required being on call for a week at a time every 3 months to answer crisis calls in the middle of the night, right? That's really crucial information. And so if the position you're hiring for involves any kind of on-call work, put it in there. Again, I think sometimes people shy away from that because they're worried they're going to scare people off. but really what all you're doing is delaying, potentially scaring people off. And if that is going to scare people off, they're probably not the best fit for the job. And you can put in there if you're worried that on-call is going to really scare people away. So another great thing to do with your job descriptions is include what the job is, but also what you provide as an employer. And of course, that would be like salary, benefits, those kinds of things. But it can also include training. So if you're worried that or you've had experience in the past that putting that the position is on call makes it so you don't get a lot of applications, you can say position is on call, but will be supported by the Director of Survivor Services or whatever position is the backup for the on-call, and will involve X amount of training to support the on-call advocate, or will have shadowing or any of those kinds of things. So you can include what you're going to provide to support that person, and that might mitigate some of the fear around on-call. So things that will turn folks off from applying for jobs is if they don't know what the process is going to look like, right? So if you're planning on taking, a month or two to collect applications, to read through, to interview, that's great, but you need to be upfront about it, because if somebody is needing and is expecting to start sooner than that, they need to be able to plan for that. So, even if you're going to have it open, every once in a while I see job applications that are like open until filled, right? Even that piece of information, even though it's not detailed, it gives somebody an idea of what's happening, right? So you're interviewing people as applicants come in, and you're going to, fill that position when you feel ready to. So even that is helpful information for applicants. And also let them know how you're going to respond. If you don't intend on responding to people who are not being offered an interview, say that in your job description so that people know, or say that, applicants will be notified of their selection by this date. So being kind of strung along with the not knowing where you are in the process, one that is, that doesn't sit well with a lot of people, and that can be a reason that they choose not to apply. And two, that can cause more work for you to have to manage. So if on top of, managing all of this hiring process, which is so much work, on top of that, if you're having to respond to emails from people all the time being like, where are we in the process? What's going on? That's going to eat into more of your valuable time. So just be really upfront and transparent about that. And think about your language in the job description. Our work is challenging, and I think it's good to be upfront and transparent about the challenges that our work faces, but you can do that without overly negative language or the phrase need not apply. That is probably not a good phrase. That's not going to set the tone for your values or the type of organization you are, that kind of negative language. So think about how you can rephrase that into a positive thing, and that'll make people more likely to apply for the job. Because our job descriptions are, they're a reflection of who we are, right? And for some people, this might be their first introduction to your organization. And so they are going to, just naturally as humans, we read into that how the organization is. And so if they see you as negative or unfriendly in the job description, or have a lack of transparency or not supportive, they're going to kind of assume that that's how the work environment is, and that may turn them off from the process. So this is a great question. What qualifications are really needed for advocates? And so there's no right answer for this, right? But here are some considerations to think about. So in the state of Colorado, for an advocacy position, there is no legal requirement of experience beyond that 15 hours. And the law really is written that the employer provides those 15 hours of training after the person is hired. So that is not something that somebody needs to have beforehand. Hours can transfer, right? So if you're hiring somebody who's already worked in an advocacy agency and they have the records of their training, their 15 hours of training for domestic violence and 30 hours for sexual assault or for dual domestic violence or sexual assault programs, they can bring that with them. That is totally fine, but if they have that documentation. So that is just that is pretty basic, right? That is not a lot of requirement. There is no kind of educational requirement that is required. There's no other certification or things like that. So as far as qualifications, it is pretty wide open, and it is pretty up to you for what you need for the position. And so that is for the core advocacy positions. So of course that is different if you're hiring for a position, obviously that is an attorney position or a mental health treatment provider. Those you're going to need to follow those requirements set out by those positions. But when you're talking about straight advocacy, it's really up to you. So one trick that was shared with me for somebody who's been hiring in this field for, gosh, over 20 years now, she really said that she leans heavy on the preferred qualifications over the required qualifications. And so that is just, these are the things we're looking for, but they're not required. Because sometimes the best advocates are folks who may not have, things that we see as a traditional background like social work or, mental health counseling or something like that, but who turn out to be really wonderful advocates. And so she always told me that oftentimes we use social worker, but what we're really wanting, when we say social worker, what we really want is not the education that the social worker has or the degree itself or any of those qualifications. What we're actually wanting are those core values that are inherent in the social work field. And so we can describe those values without including that. So a preferred qualification could be social work, or it could be education relating to these, but you can also use things like empathetic, able to set and maintain healthy boundaries, ability to navigate conflicts without judgment, ability to give and receive constructive feedback, right? So those are the things that those are some of the things you are really needing. So again, this is where it goes back to being so important that you really understand what this position is going to do, because then you can really drill down on what are those skills that you really need somebody to have. So here's some other things to consider that you could include along with educational experience, because education is great, right? Like having that foundation in social work is wonderful. That is a really good foundation in working with people and prioritizing people, but there are other ways to get that experience too, right? So here's a really common one. I think this one is actually super critical right now. So experience working with people who use substances. So if somebody has a background in addiction counseling or providing support services in a residential facility for people who are receiving substance use treatment, like that's a great bit of experience, right? That's something that we know that survivors are dealing with a lot. That could really show kind of that advocacy experience. People who are involved in the legal system, great background and experience. People who've worked with immigrants or refugees, working with parents of children, experience reporting on grant goals. Like, this is incredible, right? So much of the work that we do is grant driven and grant funded. And so if somebody has a background in that, even if it's in a different field, say somebody worked for a youth sports organization, but they had to report on grant goals, like those skills are transferable, right? So that might be something that that you're looking for in a candidate. Frontline customer service, right? Especially for folks who are going to be answering hotline calls or who are going to be dealing with folks who are walking into our buildings for services. That experience, ability to keep calm when somebody could be upset, great experience that translates into advocacy. People who are working with folks who don't have houses, right? So folks experiencing homelessness, right? That translates great to our work, and we know there's so much overlap there, so that could be great. And just people dealing with people in crisis in general is wonderful experience. So we really just want to think about this. Like, take the time when you're thinking about your goals and your outcomes that you want to include in your job description. Think about what you really need. Do you need educational experience, or do you want educational experience? But what you really need is somebody who has experience working in crisis, or whatever it is for the position you're looking at. So just spend some time, brainstorm about this. This is a great question to ask, maybe the, excuse me, if the person is going to be supervised by another person in your agency, talk with that supervisor. Like, what skills do you need? What do you wish you had on your team that would be really valuable. Talk with folks who are working in, the front line, quote unquote, direct service, who are dealing with survivors on a daily basis. Like what skills do you really value in an advocate? And kind of digging into that can be really helpful. Also, it can diversify your candidate pool, right? So if you're saying that your required qualifications are a certain educational degree or a certain number of years of experience, you're automatically excluding a group of people, right? And every once in a while, you'll have somebody who's really ambitious and who will apply anyways, even if they don't quite meet the qualifications. So, that's great. But if you're really wanting to open up your pool of applicants, if you're not getting enough folks applying, if you're wanting to really dig into that, switching over to those skills-based, or at least including that along with as preferred qualifications instead of required qualifications, can make that hiring pool bigger for you. So, a couple of tools for improving applicant reviews and interviews. So, my number one goal, my number one tip here is that your applicants, again, just like they're going to judge your organization based on what is in the job description, even more so, they are going to make decisions about whether or not they want to work in your organization based on what this hiring process is like. If it's disjointed, if there's a lot of delays, if there's not clear communication, whether it's true or not, they're going to extrapolate that to say that that's true for all organizations. And again, if you're in a tight labor market, that could turn some candidates away from you, or potentially, if you've got some really high quality candidates who have other options, that process is going to impact how they see you. And so first of all, you want to be clear. So that even before you put out your job description, you want to decide what this process is going to look like. When are those interviews going to happen? And maybe not an exact day and time, but maybe during week 2 of this process, you're going to do in-person interviews, or whatever it is. You can set the timeline. And if it's going to be a longer timeline, if you know, especially if you're a small organization, and if you're wearing like 25 different hats, if you're the executive director and the HR person and the supervisor and the backup on-call person, which I know a lot of you are, all of those people, and it takes you, the hiring process takes you more time, that's okay. You just need to be upfront and transparent about that, because that will give the applicants a better understanding and won't leave them feeling like they're kind of being left behind in the process. So it is great if you can have a committee of folks who are looking through applications and reviewing them and getting input on them. It's not possible for everybody, and we understand that, but if it is possible, this can be really helpful because you get different perspectives. It's great to have, a supervisor, leadership person, and then also maybe somebody who's on that team, or somebody who's done that job before and has a really good understanding of what it takes. Can be really helpful to have that. Lay out your timeline and stick to it. And if you have to adjust your timeline, communicate clearly about that. And use the interview time. So we want to communicate as best as possible what the job entails in our job description, but there's only so much that can be communicated just through the written word, right? So people will get a much deeper sense of what your organization is like, what kinds of skills and qualifications they might need when they're there in person. So you can use that time to really give them a clear understanding of what that looks like. If it's possible, give them a tour of the facilities, or have them talk with somebody else who does that job, or let them engage a little bit more deeply in the process. If you have the time and capacity for that, sometimes that can really help. And that can be really helpful if you're an organization who's getting lots and lots of applicants. And so you're having to kind of dig through a lot of different applications, and you're having a hard time really making a clear decision because you have so many. So sometimes having a little bit more in-depth discussions, bringing on another staff member of that team to help you with that can be really great. So the $1,000,000 question, as it were. So how do you know if your wages are competitive? So there's no like golden rule, right? I don't have a number I can give you that is the perfect number. It's going to change based on your community. But here are a couple of things that you can look at and determine what's appropriate for your situation and your community and what's doable, obviously, right? We are bound by our grant budgets, and a lot of times when we're making hiring decisions, those budgets are already set, and it might be 9 or 6 or 12 months until we are able to adjust those. So be realistic, right, about what you can handle as an organization. But here are some other touchstones, some other information that might help you make that decision. So obviously you've probably heard, that folks across the country are striking in fast food workers are striking across the country for a $15 an hour wage. That's considered kind of a bare minimum livable wage in a lot of communities. I certainly did not start out making $15 an hour as an advocate, and I know that that's not always feasible, but that is something to look at, right? So we know nationwide that $15 an hour in a lot of places is considered kind of a minimum wage level, especially like if you look at in the Denver area, they're slowly raising up minimum wage, like for the city of Denver employees up to 15 and above. So look to those other, what are the large employers in your community and kind of see where they are on that. What are other social service organizations paying? Is there another BVSA program you can call, in the county next door? Or what are your like social workers who are working for other advocacy type organizations? What are they paying? And try and get that information, see if that's comparable, see if that's workable for you. The Colorado Nonprofit Association has a salary and benefits survey every 2 years, I think, where they put up average surveys, average amounts. This is, and those average amounts are helpful, but also more helpful for folks who are in the bigger metro areas. So those salary and benefit, averages may not be as helpful in rural communities. Look at the cost of living in your community. I've included a link at the end. There are websites that you can go to, and you can see what the kind of the average cost of living is on your community based on rent and gas and other of those basic necessities. And so use that. That might be a helpful tool for you when you're trying to decide what that is. And even look at other jobs that require similar skills or experience or education levels in your community. So salary is important, right? People will absolutely make decisions whether or not they apply, and the higher your salary, the more likely you are to attract high quality candidates, but it's not the only thing. I think this is especially true for younger generations. So they say this a lot of millennials and Gen Z, who a lot of times are our entry-level advocate positions, is that those non-salary benefits matter to them a lot. So this is just some information from the Colorado Nonprofit Association. 74% of Colorado nonprofits offer health insurance. 2/3 surveyed had at least one retirement plan option. The most common was a 403B plan. 29% of Colorado nonprofits had a parental leave policy covering parents, including biological and adoptive. 73% had maternity leave, 45% had paternity, almost 25% had training and professional development, 23.5% had flexible work schedule. So essentially all of these things are things to consider. If you can't adjust your wages because of your how your grants are written right now, if you don't have that flexibility to do that, are there other ways that you can build in a lot of value for your employees in different ways? That flexible work schedule, that is really crucial to a lot of folks, especially folks who have families or people with disabilities, other folks who may need, I think it's important for just humans in general, is that things come up. And I think especially when we're thinking of advocates and folks who are working in a field with high levels of secondary trauma, having that flexibility can make a really big difference. And I've heard a lot of folks tell me that they would be they would work for an organization where you make a little bit less money if you have more flexibility in your work schedule. But of course, always be transparent about what the reality is. Maybe that's not a reality for this position, but it's just something to consider. Training, that can be a really great, including in your job description that staff is allowed to use hours for training and continuing education. That can be, a benefit for people, especially people who are new in their career, and they really value getting that kind of experience. Leave policies, right? That's going to impact people greatly, and folks who are interested in having families or adopting, having that leave policy and being upfront with that in your job description, that can not only be an attractive benefit and kind of help you overcome if you have a low salary option, but that also communicates your values, right? All of your benefits communicate what you value for your employees and what you value for your staff. And so make sure that those benefits are in line with what you're able to do realistically, but also that they're, again, a way to communicate your values to the folks who are applying for jobs. So how do you increase salaries and grants? I think this is a really awesome question. We're not going to go into it in detail right now, but I will really encourage you to go to that link, and I'll send out the slides and a link to the recording and this link at the end as well. We have gathered together some resources and some actual sample language for writing salary increases into your grants. This can be really helpful when you're doing this, and a lot of this language comes from Amy Miller, our executive director, who has used that language successfully in grants in Colorado to do salary increases. And so it's a great resource. Also, your fellow executive directors, other development folks who are working in this field can definitely be a great resource for you when you're working on that. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about resources for diverse hiring practices. And so my first kind of thing that I want to say about this is that this is a huge field, right? And it's also incredibly important. I am not a HR professional by any means, right? I've hired for a staff of a domestic violence nonprofit, but I'm not an expert in this. So a lot of this are resources and links to the folks who are experts. But again, just like everything else we've been talking about in this, your values around diversity and supporting folks in your agency need to come through in your job description, in your hiring process, and also need to be a part of your organization as a whole. You cannot just tackle diversity issues from kind of a hiring and employment perspective. That needs to be one part of your perspective, but if you're not doing the work agency-wide, you're not going to create a healthy organizational culture for folks to come into. So you don't want to just start right off the bat really going hard on diversity practices if you're not having those internal conversations about what's going on and how you're supporting folks after they've been hired as well. That's also, you hear a lot in advertising fields, like word of mouth is the best advertisement. Word of mouth is how a lot of people are going to find out about your job postings and your openings in your agency. And they're also going to get recommendations from folks, right? So, when you're supporting folks internally, when you're working on diversity, when you're being transparent and open about your mistakes and where you're working, that is going to potentially increase that kind of word of mouth, right? And so that could really help in your diversity work long term. So the next thing that really is going to have the biggest impact is that you need to be investing in your local communities that are representative of the folks you serve before you're sending them job descriptions and asking them if they have anybody that might be interested in this job opening, right? So for example, if there is a Latinx community organization in your town, you want to be meaningfully and deeply engaging with them around the services you're providing for survivors, for how you're building towards a violence-free community together as a whole, and supporting them in those things before you go in with an ask, right? So if you are engaging with other community organizations that are reflective of those folks that you're serving in a meaningful way, that's going to be huge, right? So it's not just that, a candidate that might have really great experience, here's your name for the first time when they, see it on an online posting. It's that they can say, oh, this organization was a part of this community discussion we had 3 months ago. And I know that they made the commitment to be there and participate in that. And so that tells me something about what that organization's values are, and that will increase kind of your pool of candidates. And that is just like with anything, right? Your community has so much, richness and value in it, and that is where you're going to find awesome people to come work for you. And then so your hiring process, like the nuts and bolts of what hiring looks like and what your job description looks like. Again, I sound a little bit like a broken record, but it's because it's so important. That needs to reflect your values. So for example, and I share this experience because I'm a person with a disability, and so I've had this experience, and so I can share kind of my firsthand knowledge of this. It is very rare that you see in job descriptions that one of the organization's values is to support or engage with people with disabilities, right? That's really rare. So if you have something in your job descriptions that says, we value lived experience, we value this, because we know that we are serving survivors with disabilities, and so we value that experience in our staff, that is going to set you apart, right? It needs to be true, right? You need to have done the work beforehand to make sure you're doing that, but that's going to be really valuable. But then if your process and your kind of HR employment policies don't reflect that, you're going to get people interested and then you're going to lose them again. So for example, one time I looked at a job application. They said they valued experience of like the lived experience with people with disabilities. I was like, awesome. Like, I've never really seen that before. That's something I have. I'm going to go ahead and apply. And so through this process, I went through interview process. I asked to see, what are your policies around wellness leave, right? Because that's something that impacts me a lot. And their policy, the written policy that they shared for me, required that there was a doctor's note anytime that wellness leave was used, sick time was used. And that's not feasible for most people with disabilities, right? Our disabilities, our symptoms may, incapacitate us for a period of time, but we don't go see the doctor every single time. Or we just be going to the doctor a million times a year, and that's not feasible or always necessary. So that's where that kind of connection comes in. You can see, right? So it matters what your policies and procedures are if you're doing the work on the back end to really talk about and improve your policies around disability and racial justice and all of those important topics. Then that needs to be reflected in your core values and in your policies and in your work environment culture first. Then you can layer that into your hiring practice work and your job description. And so that's going to allow you to not only reach out to these diverse communities to bring more diversity into your organization, but to do so in a responsible way to make sure that you're bringing them into an environment that you're not just going to say that you honor and value their experience, but you truly do. So another really important part of that, an important part of if you're bringing folks who have a diversity of background experiences into an organization where that has not existed, either historically or recently, you need to be prepared for some feedback, right? Because you will not have probably thought of everything, and you will probably get some feedback on how best to support somebody from that diverse experience. So again, thinking about folks with disabilities, you could have that wellness policy. You could advertise and hire for that. But when you hire that wonderful person and get them onboarded, there may be another challenge or barrier. So again, having a method for open and honest feedback from your from your staff and your employees, that's really going to improve that whole process and make sure that they are in an environment that's really healthy. Also, that's a great way, talking with staff about employment while they're currently employed and also as they're exiting employment can be a really valuable way to gather information to make sure that you're really narrowing down, you're getting the right skills, the right qualifications needed, the right information about the job description. You can get a lot of really good information from folks who are on their way out because they tend to be a little more open and honest in that experience. It will also give you some ideas of places where you can make improvements. So one thing to really think about when you're talking about wanting to make sure your staff is diverse is you want to think about how survivors with those diverse and intersectional experiences are receiving services, because that's going to impact the staff, right? If a staff person, you get an awesome staff person with a disability on board, but they are finding that folks with disabilities are having a hard time accessing your services or don't feel safe in your services, that's going to impact that employee's experience, right? So again, this all goes back to like doing that work beforehand. And for those folks who are DVP funded or using that acronym model, there's some great goals in the Accessible, Culturally and Trauma-Informed and Culturally Responsive Toolkit to help you kind of start looking at what those internal policies and practices are to do that work before you reach out to these communities. And of course, if you are an organization, for example, that is predominantly white-led, and you're wanting to expand your staff so that you are more representative of the community that you serve, you're going to want to do some work beforehand to make sure that you're kind of understanding where your biases are, understanding the challenges. Why have you been a predominantly white-led organization? Kind of digging into some of that cultural history can help. Because our communities, remember our history and experience, and that might inform their understanding of our organization. So doing all of that work beforehand is really helpful and can really help you, not only do better for survivors and improve your services, but that's also going to help your hiring process and getting quality applicants. So these are just a couple of points from a Philanthropy News article that I thought were really helpful, and the link is there at the bottom, so if you want to read the whole article, I highly encourage it. But some things to think about: prioritize diversity organization-wide. We talked about that a little bit, but even thinking about, who are your vendors? Who are you working with? Who are you supporting? All of those things make an impact. Creating a clear career path. I think this is really important for a lot of people. How and where are your opportunities for somebody to grow in their career, both, within their current position, but within potentially other positions. So again, this goes back to including in your job description information about training and support and mentoring and whatever it is that you're already doing. Include that in the job description so that somebody sees that there is going to be support for their career. Proactively identifying high potential talent. This is a great way to invest in communities. I've seen some nonprofits who are doing things like developing internships that are specifically for students to come and share their experience from diverse backgrounds. I've seen some that are doing an internship for folks with disabilities. So they're bringing on an intern, a student who is, reviewing disability practices within the organization, is supporting trainings, is doing other things, and that is a way to kind of invest in folks beforehand. But also ties back into going back to really meaningfully and deeply engaging with other community organizations. And that's where you're going to start to learn about those leaders and those folks that have a really incredible amount of talent and could potentially be a part of your staff. And then fostering a culture of inclusion. Again, that just goes back to both hiring, but also your culture is going to impact your retention, right? An organizational culture, if a group is experiencing like a large amount of turnover, culture is, one of those things you're going to want to look into and see if there are ways that you can make improvements. And that just impacts how people experience their work on a day-to-day basis. And that's really powerful when we can improve that experience, and then you're more likely to have higher retention. And that's, again, that goes back to that's some incredible word of mouth, right? When you have a staff that has been there for a while, who is talking about how much they appreciate working for your organization and the community, like that's going to spread, and that's going to help increase that pool of applicants you have when you need to fill positions. So some other resources, we have our annual conference in partnership with CICASA. We have a nonprofit management track in 2020, so registration opens March 2nd, I believe. So the website is there. If you're interested in learning more, you can see what sessions are available. There are a lot of really wonderful sessions on increasing diversity and inclusion within your organization, so I highly encourage you to attend some of those. Also, we have all of our previous webinars available for free, the recordings on our YouTube. So if you ever want to revisit those will be available, including this one, which will go up later today. So does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to type things in a chat box. Or I can unmute. I think I've got folks. All right, I think I've got folks unmuted if you're interested in sharing a question. And I will also say, like, these are topics that you can reach out to us individually at any point in time. We're here to support you in your work. So if you have questions or help, or you want a second set of eyes on your job position description or anything like that, here at Violence Free Colorado, we'd be happy to help you with that. I'm not seeing or hearing any questions, so I'm just going to go and this is my contact information. Feel free to call me, shoot me an email, whatever is easiest. Also, these resources, and these will be included in the email that I send out to you all afterwards. These are links to the resources I talked about, but also there's some other resources. This first one here is a really great view. It is somebody who is kind of described as a dream diversity hire, because they have a lot of different intersectional identities, and they talk about their experience with that. So that can be really helpful to have that direct experience when you're writing your applications and you're looking for, or writing your position descriptions and looking for applicants. And then here are some more job description resources. And that is the end of my presentation. So feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending your time with me this afternoon. And we look forward to talking with you again. We have 2 more webinars coming up in this Healthy Organizations webinar series. All right, thanks so much, everybody.